Hi there, I'm Davey Cretin. Welcome to Cretin Classics. This is a video that I'm calling My Musical Journey. This video was inspired by another YouTube channel that I like to watch called The Contrarians, that's run by Martin Popoff, who's a famous author. He's written over 100 books on hard rock and heavy metal, and he's got a whole panel of people that do the shows, the Contrarians, and they each have their own opinions on albums and things. They do different topics. Great channel. But at any rate, they had this subject a few weeks ago about different people's musical journeys. So I saw that and I was inspired to do my own take on that video. So when I was a young kid, my mother, out of my family, my mother was the one who was into music. She used to sing, she used to play the piano, not professionally, but she just loved music. And she's the one who had the big record collection. She's the one who turned me on to the Beatles and a lot of pop music from the 60s and the early 70s. So part of me gravitated to music, and then my father was the big sports guy. So growing up in New York, as if you can't tell by my accent, big New York accent, I was into sports also. So music was one of my loves, and sports. And I was a big, and still am, a big New York Mets fan. I also followed football and basketball, a little bit of hockey, but not as much as baseball. Baseball is my sport. So getting back to music, my mother's the one that turned me on to music. And she and her mother, my grandmother, wanted to give me piano lessons. My other grandmother played the piano too, but I was a stubborn kid, and because they all wanted me to take piano lessons, I didn't. And it was always one of my big regrets. Oh, I could have been a keyboard player, I could have been in bands, yada, yada, yada. But more on that after. So I was into music, and my mother turned me on to pop music. I was into a lot of AM radio, and I would listen to the two big top 40 pop stations here in New York, WABC and WNBC, on the AM radio. And they played the hits of the day, the top 40. And that's what I liked. I gravitated to music. I used to love music. I remember buying singles when I was a little boy. I'd go into record stores and I'd buy 45s. But then, without any older siblings, I have a younger sister, Mandy, and she's into music also. So, without any older sisters or brothers, and just my parents were into more mellower music, somehow in 1977 I found the FM band on the radio, and I started listening to these New York stations. One was WPLJ 95.5, played rock music, and the other was WNEW FM 102.7 that played rock music. Unfortunately, in about 1984 or so, 84, 85, I can't remember the exact time, but PLJ went top 40 pop. And I still remember to this day the song I heard on the radio when I put on PLJ. You had preset stations on your stereos back then. I had a nice stereo. Fisher was the brand. Tribute to my friend Joel W., whom I mentioned in my Led Zeppelin video. And I had a Fisher rack system. And on the FM dial, I had it set to PLJ, NEW, and I put on PLJ one day, and I heard the song, I think it's by Ollie and Jerry, There's No Stopping Us Now, from the first Breakin' movie from 1983. Now, since I had worked in a video store at the time, I knew all about Breakin', the movie, and I knew that song. And I heard it on PLJ and thought I was on the wrong station. And it was on PLJ, and I said, what the heck? And then I listened till the end of the song, and they said, 95.5 top music hits. And I was like, oh no, PLJ isn't rock anymore. They changed formats. So they became a top 40 station. But at that time, there was another New York station, the Apple 103.5, 103.1, I can't remember exactly, WAPP, who played rock music. And there was also at the time, when I started listening and the weather was good, I would get a station from Long Island, WDRE, and they were a rock station in the 70s. And they played, I think, more of a variety, slightly different songs from albums, deeper tracks. I remember in the early 80s when Van Halen's Fair Warning came out, I heard So This Is Love on WDRE. I don't know which came first, DRELIR. They changed their name, whatever. But I had heard So This Is Love by Van Halen from Fair Warning on that station, 92.3 WDRE. I think they eventually became LIR, vice versa, whatever. And there was also, if the weather was good enough, there was a station in Connecticut, I think, or was it Jersey? WDHA, that was it, all the way at the right end of the dial, 105.1, I think. And if the weather was really clear, I could pull in that station. So all these stations added and turned me on to a lot of different bands that I didn't know about. So I became fascinated with rock music, and that's what I gravitated towards. I still knew top 40. I still like some of it, not all of it. A lot of my friends were into music too, but they were always into sports more than I was, and I sort of became the de facto music guy. Then I started working in a video store in the early 80s, early to mid 80s, which turned into a video record store. So then I was in my element, and this is when metal was really taking hold. And I remember we got some promos from a label on the Brooklyn Queens borderline called Relativity Records. And I actually got my first free album, which was a Nuclear Assault album called Game Over. And they were like hardcore punk slash thrash. And that's the first record I got for free was Nuclear Assault Game Over, believe it or not. Very odd thing to get for free. And we started carrying hard rock and metal in the top 40. I remember we had a display case where the 45s were locked inside, and also the compact discs. And that's when you had the long boxes, not just the compact disc, but it was in a long cardboard box at the time. So I remember across the counter from where I stayed to ring up the customers and do paperwork, yada, yada, yada. I remember Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms, we had on compact disc in the long box in the showcase. Madonna, I think it was True Blue, and Billy Joel, The Bridge. So this was like 1986. Yeah, definitely 1986. Those were all 1986 records. That's when we became a video record store. Besides renting videos, we also started selling music. And Metallica was huge at the time. And we would get Ride the Lightning, we'd get Master of Puppets, we'd sell out of them. You know, we were a small store. It was a mom and pop store, so we only had a few copies at a time. And then we'd sometimes have to wait weeks and weeks to get them back on vinyl and on cassette. And I don't even think they were on CD at the time. If they were, I don't even know if we carried them. Can't remember. But that was the first time I worked in a record store for about a year and a half or so. Then I got another record store job. It was September of 1988. I worked at a place that's pretty well known on Long Island called Titus Oaks Titus Oaks CD and Record Exchange. And they were a new and used record store. And then when CDs became in vogue, they started carrying CDs. And when I first started there, they had a video section, and I was hired to be the video manager. But a few months after I started there, they got rid of all the videos, sold to the boss, Titus, as he was known. That was his nickname. His name was Alan Meltzer, actually, and he was a bigwig in the music business because he was successful at everything he ever did, but he never had a record label. He tried it out with Grass Records. Some of you might remember Grass Records from the 90s. They had a lot of alt rock on their label, but they were really small potatoes. And then he opened Wind Up Records. Alan Meltzer, nicknamed Titus from Titus Oaks, opened up Wind Up Records. And Wind Up, what band did they have? Creed. And Creed sold millions of CDs. So my former boss, the owner of Titus Oaks, became a music mogul. Besides having the first, Titus Oaks, we were the first stores. He had a distributorship actually in Connecticut. And it was the first computer run music business. And then we were the satellite record stores, Titus Oaks, at the time. So I worked there for like a lot of years, 13 years, until we changed our name, got a different owner. We became the Music Arcade. And then eventually I worked at Mr. Cheapo's on Long Island. So from like the mid 80s till I think it was 2016 when I left Mr. Cheapo's, I was in the quote unquote in the music business tangentially, I always thought, for like 30 something years. So I worked at record stores. So I learned about a lot of different genres of music, got into some jazz fusion, some jazz, a lot of R&B, funk, and also the people I hung out with over the years turned me on to different types of music. In the 80s, I had one group of friends that liked the rock at the time, my local neighborhood friends. We all gravitated to like AC/DC were big at the time, and Foreigner, Styx, a lot of those album-oriented rock bands. And they played a lot of classic rock, and we also loved the Who and Zeppelin and the Beatles and the Stones, all that kind of stuff. And then I met some new friends in high school. They liked new wave music, so I got turned on to bands like A Flock of Seagulls and Berlin and Missing Persons, The Fix, all that kind of stuff. Hung out with another group of friends who were into punk. They turned me on to the Ramones, Clash, Sex Pistols, Buzzcocks. Then when I started working in the record stores, a lot of coworkers, one guy specifically I remember, he turned me on to King's X and Jane's Addiction. Same time in 1988 when I first started there. Guy named Rick, great guy, knew his music. I think he was a musician too. But at any rate, turned me on to those two bands, and I'll be forever grateful that Rick turned me on to the mighty King's X and also Jane's Addiction. Jane's Addiction I saw recently for the first time in concert, opening for Smashing Pumpkins, and they were very good. Harry Farrell. King's X I had seen a bunch of times too. I saw them tour their second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth records, and I've seen them since then too. Unfortunately, I missed them on their debut album tour, but King's X, another great, undervalued, underrated band. So working in record stores, I also learned to appreciate a band that I never liked. A lot of my coworkers loved the Grateful Dead. I never liked the Grateful Dead, but I was turned on to the Grateful Dead, and I began to see things in their music that I liked. Now, a lot of Deadheads go to the live stuff, love the live stuff. I've never been a huge live album fan. There's great live albums, don't get me wrong. Personally, I'd rather be at a show than listen to a live concert CD, but there are some classic live albums. And I gravitated to a lot of the Grateful Dead studio records, some of the later stuff, some of the earlier period stuff, the middle period stuff, and I found Grateful Dead songs and music that I actually liked. So working and becoming friendly with other people turned me on to a lot of different types of music. And I'm grateful, no pun intended, that wasn't planned. I'm grateful that I met these people and I worked with them and they turned me on to this music that I still like to this day. So there's a wide berth of music that I like. I like pop stuff going back to the 70s stuff that my mom turned me on to. Barry Manilow. I like some of the Air Supply hits back in the day. Love Zeppelin, love the hard rock that came in the 80s and the 70s stuff. And then there's progressive rock. That's something that I sort of found on my own. From hearing certain Yes songs on the radio back in the late 70s, I started buying Yes albums. And Yes to this day are my favorite band. And I know they've put out some clunkers. Eventually, I will do a ranking of the whole Yes discography, which is a task in itself. I think they have 24 studio records, and there are some clunkers there, unlike some of the other bands I've done on the channel here and that I will do. But I became fascinated with progressive rock. Now, when I worked at Titus Oaks, there were two guys I worked with, George and Joe. I'm not going to use last names. I don't know if they want me to say their last names here. So George and Joe, they said, well, what kind of music do you like? When I first started working there, we talk about music. I like Yes. Oh, what about Old Genesis with Peter Gabriel? I said, yeah, I know he was in the band back then, but I don't know any of those records. And George said, if you love Yes, old Yes, 70s Yes, you're going to love Old Genesis. And he was right. And Old Genesis now, I like more than most of the newer Genesis. The Peter Gabriel stuff is great. A few albums they made after Gabriel left are great. So I was turned on to another band, just part of their career that I didn't even know about, because I was brought up on the Genesis that was played on rock radio, FM radio, which was Misunderstanding from the Duke album. I knew from Duke on up. And then I was opened up and my eyes were open and I found all this early Genesis stuff. And I was like, wow, this stuff is amazing. The playing, the composition, it's awesome. Gabriel was a great frontman, still is. I'll be doing a ranking of his solo albums eventually, the Genesis albums. There's so many shows that I have planned in my brain that I just have to get down on paper and tape. So there are album ranking shows coming up. There are top song shows coming up. And I'm going to have guests on my channel too. In the spring and summer, I'm planning guests. People whose channels I've guested on, like Jack Toledano, All or Not According to Jack. I've been on his channel. He's going to appear here. The three guys from upstate New York, Rock Show Critique, they're going to appear on my channel. That's Joey, that's Tom, and that's David. They'll eventually be on my channel. Who else? Bicycle Legs, my new friend from Australia. I've been on his channel a few times. He's going to appear here. My girlfriend and I are going to do some rankings and some top songs. My sister and I. My cousin's going to come on. We're going to do some interesting shows that my friend Irene has recommended. Some of my old childhood friends are going to come on and do some shows. I'll be ranking the Squeeze catalog with my old friend Carolyn. Her brother Anthony, he's going to come on. We're going to do our favorite songs by the band The Cars. And I've already done an album ranking by them, I should say, not then, by them. So I do have a lot of shows coming up in the spring and summer. So please like and subscribe and comment on about your musical journey below. How did you first discover music? What got you started on it? So that's it for now. I just want to thank everyone who's ever inspired me in music. Oh, and one fast thing I do want to say. I did play, I've mentioned this before, I was in a Ramones tribute band. I was the singer. I played Joey Ramone for a decade. So it was a whole learning experience in itself. I'd never been in a band. And here I was, a guy in his 30s, all of a sudden singing in a band. But I'll be doing shows on that as well. So the Ramones are another big part of my personality. So I want to thank everyone who turned me on to music, and I want to thank you for watching this video and remind everyone to rock out and prog on. Thanks. Bye-bye.